What if the person who was supposed to support you the most suddenly decided you were worthless? What if, after a lifetime of dedication, you were cruelly discarded like an object with no value? This is the story of Margaret, a woman who sacrificed everything for the ones she loved. But when she lost her job and needed help, she was heartlessly abandoned by her own daughter. What no one knew was that Margaret had a secret that would change everything. Stay with me until the end and discover how this woman delivered the greatest life lesson her family would never forget. The heavy rain pounded against the sidewalk as Margaret felt the weight of her suitcase in her hand. Her daughter Olivia's words still echoed in her mind. "Mom, I can't support you anymore. You've lived your life, now it's my turn." The cold cut through her skin, and her tears blended with the raindrops. How could this be possible? After years of hard work, sleepless nights, and countless sacrifices, her only reward was the door shutting in her face. Her heart pounded, her chest tightened, and an emptiness consumed her from within. But what her daughter didn't know was that fate had unexpected surprises in store. She looked up at the brightly lit windows of the house that, just a few hours ago, had been her home. Inside were her grandchildren, the children she had helped raise since birth. How many nights had she spent rocking them in her arms, telling them stories until they fell asleep, cooking their favorite meals, and wiping away their tears after a nightmare. They were her joy, her reason for living. The thought that she might never see them again pierced her chest like a knife. The sound of their laughter, which once filled the house, was now nothing more than a distant echo in her memory. Would Olivia allow them to ask about her? Would they miss her? Or would they grow up hearing only a distorted version of the story, believing that their grandmother had abandoned them? Margaret tightened her grip on the suitcase handle, trying to hold back the sob threatening to escape. She felt lost, ungrounded. But at the same time, she knew that standing there, begging for the love of a daughter who no longer cared, was not an option. With one last glance at the house, she turned and walked down the dark street. She had no idea where she was going, but one thing was certain, that night would not be her end. It would be the beginning of something new. Margaret had always been a strong and determined woman. From a young age, she learned to fight for her survival alone. Her marriage to Richard had been brief. He never accepted the responsibility of fatherhood. So, from the very first months of her daughter's life, Margaret had to take on the role of both mother and father. There was no luxury, no time for complaints. She worked tirelessly, taking any job she could find. For years, she sewed clothes for neighbors, cleaned luxurious homes, and even looked after other families' children just to ensure her daughter had the best life possible. Rest was a luxury she couldn't afford, as every penny she earned was invested in Olivia's education and future. While other children had nannies and expensive toys, Olivia had a mother who worked twice as hard to make sure she never went hungry. When it was time for school, Margaret did everything in her power to enroll her daughter in the best institutions, always sacrificing to give Olivia opportunities she had never had herself. She gave up buying new clothes, going out with friends, traveling. Every personal desire was put aside to ensure Olivia not only survived but thrived. And the girl did thrive. She grew into an independent woman, earned scholarships, graduated from a prestigious university, and, shortly after, married Ethan, a successful businessman. At the beginning of their marriage, Olivia and Ethan were too focused on building their careers. When they had children, they quickly realized they needed someone reliable to care for them. That was when Margaret, who was still working at the time, moved into her daughter's home to help. Margaret didn't just take care of her grandchildren, she cooked, cleaned, and ensured everything in the house was in order. She did it out of love, never asking for anything in return. If Olivia and Ethan arrived home late from work, Margaret was there to make sure the little ones were fed and tucked into bed. If one of them fell ill, she would stay up all night at their bedside. "Mom, I don't know what we would do without you," Olivia would say on some nights, exhausted but relieved to see her children well cared for. Margaret would smile, feeling useful, feeling like she belonged. You don't have to worry, dear. I'll always be here to help you. But over time, Olivia began to see her mother not as essential support, but as a burden. To her, Margaret was no longer the strong maternal figure who had raised her. She had become an ever-present reminder of something she no longer needed. When Margaret lost her job at 60 and became financially dependent on her daughter, Olivia and Ethan showed no gratitude for all the years she had helped. On the contrary, they saw her as a problem. That night, when Margaret noticed something strange in Olivia's gaze, her heart clenched. Sitting at the kitchen table, she watched her daughter hesitate before speaking. "Mom. Ethan and I talked. You know things have been difficult for us too, don't you?" Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. "Yes, dear. But I help in every way I can. I take care of the kids, the house." Olivia sighed, avoiding her mother's eyes. "But you don't work anymore. And now, expenses have increased. We need more space, more privacy. The truth is, Mom, you need to find somewhere else to live." Margaret's world crumbled. She blinked a few times as if she hadn't understood. "Somewhere else? But, Olivia, this is my home too. I take care of everything here." Her daughter looked away, her voice firmer this time. "Mom, I can't support you anymore. You've lived your life, now it's my turn." The silence was suffocating. Margaret felt her stomach drop. The lump in her throat burned, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded slowly and stood up. "If that's what you want, then I'll go." That same day, her suitcase was packed and left at the door. No goodbyes, no hugs from her grandchildren. Just a closed door and an unbearable silence. Margaret stood in the rain, staring at the house where she had spent the last years helping to raise her grandchildren. The weight of humiliation mixed with the pain of abandonment. How had she dedicated so much to a family that, in the end, saw her as nothing but an inconvenience? Her years of sacrifice were ignored, reduced to a burden Olivia and Ethan wanted to rid themselves of as quickly as possible. She felt a painful squeeze in her chest as she realized that, to them, she had never been a mother or a grandmother, just an unpaid servant, discarded the moment she was no longer useful. At first, the pain threatened to consume her. Her body trembled, but she wasn't sure if it was from the cold or the heartbreak. A part of her wanted to knock on the door one last time, to beg to see her grandchildren, to plead for a second chance. But a voice inside her, stronger than the pain, whispered something different: enough. If Olivia saw her as a burden, then perhaps it was time to prove that nothing could hold her back. The cold wind cut against Margaret's face as she wandered aimlessly through the wet streets. With each step, the reality of her new condition became clearer. She no longer had a home. She no longer had a family. But as painful as it was, she still had something: herself. She felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. For a fleeting moment, she thought it might be Olivia. Perhaps a late regret, a message asking her to come back. But when she pulled out the device, she saw only a bank notification. Her account balance. It was modest, but enough for a fresh start. No one knew that, for years, Margaret had been quietly saving what little she earned. Whenever she received payment for cleaning houses or doing small side jobs, she would set aside a small amount and invest it in a discreet fund, following the advice of an old employer who had always recognized her value. At first, it was just a symbolic gesture, an attempt to build some kind of security. But over time, those investments grew. And now, they gave Margaret something her own daughter did not have: independence. With steady steps, she walked to the end of the street and hailed a taxi. She got in without looking back. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror and asked where she wanted to go. For the first time in many years, Margaret realized that the answer was entirely in her hands. "Any hotel," she answered, her voice heavy with sadness and contemplation. When she arrived at the hotel, the receptionist greeted her with a warm smile. "How can I help you, ma'am?" She lifted her chin, ignoring the weight of grief pressing on her chest. "I need a room. The best one you have available." That night, sleep did not come easily. The echoes of the past few hours played over and over in her mind. The world she once knew had crumbled. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to feel the last remnants of sorrow. Then, she took a deep breath. No more. She would not shed another tear for those who never valued her. The next morning, she woke up in a soft bed, a stark contrast to the hard mattress she had grown accustomed to at Olivia's house. The silence of the room brought her peace. She reached for her phone and, without hesitation, searched for apartments to rent. She had enough money to start anew. For the first time in decades, a small thread of hope coursed through her veins. She found a small apartment in the city center, modest but comfortable. She used part of her savings to rent the place and furnish it with the essentials. As she looked around her new home, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. That night, Margaret sat in her new living room, a warm cup of tea in her hands. Instead of dwelling on the past, she allowed herself to imagine the future. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, it was her road to walk. But starting over at 60 wasn't easy. Margaret soon realized that the job market didn't value women her age. She applied for a position as a seamstress in well-known boutiques, only to be met with rejection. She tried to work as a barista in a coffee shop but was deemed too old to handle the fast-paced environment. Each closed door made her question whether she would ever be able to rebuild her life. She would leave home for job interviews, dressed in her best outfit, trying to project confidence, but every time, she returned with a heavier heart. It was as if her years of experience and dedication meant nothing. After decades of hard work, the world seemed determined to forget her. One night, alone in her tiny apartment, Margaret stared at her hands. Calloused hands that had supported a household, cared for grandchildren, cooked meals, and stitched countless pieces of clothing. Now, those same hands felt useless. Am I truly worthless? She thought as she held a cup of tea, long gone cold. Then, one overcast afternoon, as she wandered the city streets without direction, she heard someone call her name. She turned and saw Claire, an old friend from the days when she worked as a seamstress for wealthy families. "Margaret. It's been so long. How are you?" Claire asked, wrapping her in a warm hug. Margaret forced a smile, trying to look optimistic, but Claire saw through her facade. They sat down at a nearby cafe, and Margaret finally let it all out. "I feel like the world has no place for me anymore. I spent my whole life working, but now no one wants to hire me." Claire reached across the table and held her hands with a reassuring smile. "Margaret, you have a gift. Your sewing has always been flawless. Why don't you start your own business? These days, social media can help anyone sell their work." Margaret chuckled at the idea, shaking her head. "Claire, I barely know how to use my phone, let alone sell things online. Who says you have to do it alone? I'll help you. Give me a chance to prove this can work." A mix of hesitation and hope flickered in Margaret's eyes. Could she really do it? With a deep breath, she nodded. In the following days, Claire patiently taught her how to create an Instagram profile and take good photos of her work. They started by posting pictures of the few pieces Margaret had left. At first, the likes trickled in slowly, but then, something began to shift. A local influencer stumbled upon Margaret's page and commissioned a custom dress. She later posted a glowing review, praising the impeccable craftsmanship. Within days, Margaret's inbox was flooded with messages from potential customers. She could hardly believe it. For the first time in what felt like forever, her work was being valued again. A newfound energy surged through her. She spent nights sewing, carefully inspecting every stitch, ensuring each piece was unique and perfect. As orders poured in, Claire suggested Margaret record videos showcasing her creative process. Though hesitant at first, she eventually agreed. To her surprise, the videos started going viral. People were drawn to her story, her resilience, and her undeniable talent. Margaret found herself deeply moved as she read comments from women who saw themselves in her journey. "I'm 55, and I thought it was too late to start over. You gave me hope. My grandmother was a seamstress, and your work reminds me of her. Your pieces are stunning. You've proven that talent and determination have no age. I can't wait to buy one of your dresses." Each message reminded her that she was far from alone. The hands she once thought were useless were now creating something that truly mattered to people. Within months, her brand had transformed into a thriving business. Margaret received invitations for interviews, and her name began circulating in the world of artisanal fashion. What had started as a desperate attempt to survive had blossomed into a newfound passion, and a source of independence. One evening, as she finished another custom order, Margaret paused for a moment and took in the sight of her small yet bustling atelier. Shelves stacked with fabric, sewing machines humming in the background, orders neatly arranged on her desk. She smiled to herself, a sense of peace settling over her. For the first time, Margaret realized she didn't need an employer to validate her worth. She was in control of her own destiny. With the support of Claire and her growing customer base, Margaret realized she still had so much to offer. Her business was expanding rapidly, and orders multiplied by the day. But beyond the carefully stitched fabrics, something even more meaningful was emerging, a renewed sense of purpose and belonging. One evening, as she went through a long list of pending orders, Margaret realized she could no longer handle the demand on her own. Messages on Instagram poured in non-stop, and the number of requests was outpacing what she could sew by herself. It was then that she made a bold decision. She would open a small atelier and provide opportunities for other women who, like her, had been cast aside by the job market simply because of their age. She placed an ad in local newspapers and community groups, searching for experienced seamstresses who were willing to work in a welcoming and collaborative environment. To her surprise, she received more responses than expected on the very first day. Women who had spent their lives sewing but were discarded by the industry now saw Margaret as a beacon of hope, a second chance. One of the first to arrive was Helen, a 65-year-old woman who had worked for decades as a seamstress in a prestigious fashion house before being laid off when the company decided to modernize its team with younger professionals. "I never thought I'd step foot in an atelier again," Helen said, her voice shaking as she held Margaret's hands. "But seeing what you're doing here gives me hope. I don't want charity, I just want to prove that I'm still capable." Margaret smiled warmly and gave Helen's hands a reassuring squeeze. "Helen, no one here is receiving charity. We're building something together. You have no idea how much your experience will enrich this project." Slowly, the small atelier became a sanctuary for women who had been invisible for too long. As they worked side by side, they shared their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. The space was more than just a workplace, it was a community, a place where every woman felt valued and empowered. Margaret was adamant that every garment carried a personal touch, a reflection of the experiences and resilience of the women who created them. These weren't just clothes, they were living testaments to perseverance, skill, and the refusal to be discarded. Every stitch was infused with the strength of women who had been overlooked but were now reclaiming their own narratives. As word spread, Margaret's brand gained recognition, not just for its high-quality designs but for the powerful stories behind each creation. During an interview with a fashion magazine, a journalist asked her what made her collection so special. "Our clothes are made by hands that carry history," Margaret replied. "Every stitch holds a memory, every fabric has meaning. We're not just selling clothes, we're telling the stories of women who refuse to be forgotten. The interview went viral. Within days, influencers began sharing Margaret's work, praising not only the craftsmanship but the mission behind it. Soon, even major retailers expressed interest in selling her collections. What had started as an act of survival had transformed into something far greater, a symbol of empowerment and reinvention. One afternoon, as Margaret was finishing a custom dress, she paused to take in the scene around her. She saw Helen laughing with another seamstress, Claire warmly assisting a customer, and younger apprentices eagerly learning from the experienced women around them. All of it existed because she had chosen not to give up. A soft smile spread across her lips as she whispered to herself. I did it. Once, her daughter had seen her as a burden. But now, Margaret was a successful entrepreneur, an inspiration to women of all ages. She had proven that it's never too late to start over, to learn, to reinvent oneself. Her name had become synonymous with strength and resilience. And her story had become undeniable proof that dreams have no expiration date. When Olivia and Ethan discovered Margaret's success, they were in shock. At first, they tried to ignore it. But when they saw Margaret on the cover of a magazine as a symbol of resilience, envy and greed took over. Headlines praised the journey of the woman who, at 60 years old, had been abandoned by her own daughter and found a new purpose, turning her pain into triumph. The atelier thrived, her designs were sought after by renowned stylists, and her story had inspired women worldwide. Olivia's discomfort grew with every new mention of her mother's name. She and Ethan began to feel the weight of their past choices. Their house was now mortgaged, Ethan's business was struggling, and for the first time, their financial stability was at risk. That's when Olivia decided to seek her mother out. One late afternoon, Margaret was in her atelier, organizing orders, when the door swung open. Olivia stepped inside, her eyes shining in a way Margaret recognized all too well. It wasn't longing, it was interest. Mom, can we talk? I miss you. Margaret knew exactly what this meant. The couple who once saw her as a burden now wanted a piece of her success. She studied her daughter's face for a moment. There was no true remorse, only a poorly disguised attempt at reconnection out of convenience. Margaret remained expressionless. What is it, my dear? Need help? Margaret asked, crossing her arms. Olivia hesitated for a second but kept her voice soft. Mom, I was wrong. I know I treated you badly, but I'm sorry. You did so much for me and the kids. I think we can start over. Be a family again. Margaret smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of someone who no longer fell for lies. Olivia, family is the ones who stand by you in the hardest moments. I have already started over, without you. Olivia's face paled. Ethan, waiting outside, stepped into the atelier, trying to strengthen their act. Margaret, we know we made mistakes, but look at us. You've always helped us. We can't forget the bond we have. Margaret looked at Ethan, then back at Olivia, feeling a mix of pity and satisfaction. For the first time, she was in control of her own life. She no longer needed her daughter's approval. She had nothing to prove to anyone. Those ties were cut the day you threw me out of your house with nothing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a business to run. Olivia tried to insist, but Margaret simply pointed to the door. You made your decisions in the past. Now, I'm making mine. Before Olivia could leave, Margaret took a deep breath and looked directly into her daughter's eyes. But you know, Olivia. There's one thing you still have that I would love to have back someday, my grandchildren. They are not to blame for what happened between us. If, one day, you're willing to open this door so they can know who I am, then maybe we can have a real conversation. Olivia lowered her gaze. For the first time, the confidence she had always displayed wavered. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but she hesitated. Her eyes shimmered, not just with wounded pride or frustration, but something deeper. "Mom, she started, but the words disappeared into the air. Margaret remained firm, unwilling to bend. Olivia clutched the strap of her purse, her fingers tightening around it. She exhaled deeply, nodding slightly, and after a long pause, turned to leave. But outside, she didn't walk away immediately. She stood on the sidewalk, took a deep breath, and looked at the sign above her mother's atelier. Her eyes traced Margaret's name on the glass window, and a wave of something unfamiliar washed over her. Shame? Regret? Nostalgia? She couldn't tell. Ethan called her impatiently from the car. Olivia blinked, shook her head, and stepped inside the vehicle without looking back. And so, Margaret closed the door on those who had never valued her. But deep in her heart, she knew that maybe, one day, that door could open again. Today, Margaret looks at everything she has built and feels a deep sense of satisfaction. Her atelier has grown and now employs dozens of women who, like her, had been rejected and cast aside by society. Women who dedicated their lives to their families, only to be abandoned when they were no longer useful. But in Margaret's atelier, they found more than just a job. They found a new purpose, a place where they are valued and respected. Margaret feels immense pride seeing each of these women regain their confidence. Some arrived broken, hopeless, doubting their own abilities. But over time, they learned that they still had so much to offer. They saw their pieces being sold to major brands, their work praised, their names gaining recognition. And above all, they reclaimed their dignity. Margaret realizes that her business is not just about clothing or fashion. It's about rebuilding lives, proving that no one should be discarded simply because they have aged. Every client who wears a piece from her collection is not just wearing well-stitched fabric, but the story of a woman who chose to fight for her worth. Beyond running her business, Margaret has become an active voice in the community. She organizes talks, workshops, and meetings, teaching other women how to prepare for the future. One of the greatest lessons of her journey has been the importance of saving and planning financially for the challenges of old age. If she hadn't quietly saved money over the years, her story might have ended very differently. And that is a lesson she makes sure to share. Never assume someone else will take care of you, she says in her speeches. The greatest security you can have is the one you build with your own hands. Save money, learn something new, stay active. You never know when life will test you. Today, Margaret no longer holds resentment. She has come to understand that some people simply don't appreciate what they have until it's gone. But she also knows that her time is too precious to be wasted on regrets. Her focus is on continuing to grow, helping more women rise again, and proving to the world that life does not end when others decide you are no longer valuable. And so, the woman who was once rejected found her true strength. Not because someone saved her, but because she learned to save herself. And that, she knows, is the greatest victory of all. And now, I ask you. How many women do you know who have been cast aside by society, by their families, or by the job market? How many of them have yet to discover the power they carry within? If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more stories of resilience and new beginnings. Leave a comment and share this with someone who needs to hear this message. And always remember, it is never too late to discover your true worth.